Anipirukkum Vanakkam. A very good afternoon to all. Thank you, Dr. Balavenkat Avarkar, for inviting me for this wonderful gathering of eminent doctors, eminent personalities. I think it is one of the most important opportunities for our community, especially for the transgender community of India, to speak in such a big gathering of some of the most important people of this country. I'm sure most of you are aware that what is the condition of gender non-conforming or transgender people in our country. Particularly when you look at the contemporary lifestyle of transgender people, I'm sure many of you would have met them or seen them in trains and in public spaces, begging, doing sex work, dancing badai, and all that. I'm sure you would have wondered what this people's lifestyle could be, who they are, where they come from, and all that. Let me tell you that we are no different from you. We were born from a mother's womb as much as you all were born. And we have dreams, and every one of the as transgenders or hijras or whatever we are called as, we all had dreams as much as you all had dreams. And when we become adults, most of our dreams are shattered. And that is only because of one single reason, that our gender identity, our perceived gender identity, is not that of our anatomical gender or sex. Most of us are born of one sex, and while we grow up, we identify ourselves as gender non-conformity, or as transgender, or of the opposite sex. Gender is socially constructed. If today we are wearing saris because most of other women are wearing saris, likewise it's for men too. And in a country like India, which is patriarchal and very male dominant, a boy thinking like a woman, or acting like a woman, or being like a woman, or living like a woman, being effeminate, being feminine, is considered inferior. Today, all the hatred or violence or rejection or discrimination or stigma that the transgender people face in our country is because of gender inequality. When women face the violence or hatred or rape or whatever, transgender people in our country face it 5 times higher. But most of it is not reported in the media. We are an invisible community. You know that most of our community people are begging and doing sex work. Have you ever wondered why they do it? Most of us are rejected from our families. And that happens during our teenage years when we come out as transgenders to our families. And at schools, because most of us, especially when we talk about trans females, those children who are born as male sex, identify themselves as opposite sex. When we study at school, we go through several discriminations, not only by our fellow students, but also by our teachers, by our school staff, everybody. Almost each and every person, transgender person in this country, has been at least once sexually abused. I was one of them. I grew up in a middle class family, which is 40 kilometers away from here, in a small town called Pollachi. Right from my age 12 or 11, I used to express my gender identity to my parents. They were not understanding it, like all parents, because we don't have in our educational curriculum or in our media or in our literature. I'm talking about the contemporary ones. We are not talking about gender diversity. We are not talking about transgender people. I'm sure in none of your schools, or even in colleges, you would have studied about the social role or the social condition of the transgender people in India. Yet we exist. The knowledge about gender diversity, especially about transgender or gender non-conformative state, is denied to us, denied to our children. It was denied to adults. It was denied to our parents. And because of that denial, today transgender people are victims. Victims of violence, victims of rape, victims of being rejected by our families and on streets. Most of us are begging and at night doing sex work. And I also see many corporate companies come forward to offer jobs for transgender people. But where are the qualifications? Not even 70% of the transgender people today in our country are not qualified enough to to get a degree. They haven't even completed their 12th standard. Being rejected from their homes at an early age, they step out of their homes, end up on streets, join with other transgender people whose livelihood options are begging and sex work again. And they too become a part of it. Once you are into sex work, it is impossible for you to come out of it and live a very normal life. And when you go for sex work, you constantly become a victim of rapes by gundas, sometimes even by the police. You are prone to violence, and you're prone to HIV as well. You're vulnerable to not only STDs and HIV and all that, but you're also vulnerable to rape and violence, not only by the thugs, but also by the police themselves, sometimes. And only in 2014, after 10 years of our long fight, more than 15 years we have been fighting with the Indian government and Indian legal fraternity about legally recognizing the transgender community. In 2014, on April 15th of 2014, the Supreme Court of India legally recognized the transgender people and directed the center as well as the state governments to implement measures to prevent discrimination and violence against us, to open the doors for education and dignified employment for us. But it will take many years. It might take a couple of decades for the community to stand, to become doctors, engineers, professors. Until then, most of us are remaining beggars. The government is a part of the whole society. It cannot change what we can do as civilians, as citizens of this country. We are the change makers. Only we need to change. The government can implement measures, welfare schemes, give a housing loan and all those things, a lot of things. But the attitude has to change. Our stereotype notions on gender and transgender people have to change. And since schools and colleges don't give us that, don't teach us that, we need to educate ourselves. And we need to educate our children. That is the most important thing. I was one of the fortunate transgender person. to be accepted by family. And because I was accepted by my family and protected by them, they gave me good education. I was able to complete 2 master's degrees, speak in 5 languages. I was able to go to different parts of the world confidently, very open about my identity, and never ashamed of myself. And I think each and every transgender person in this country deserves what I deserve. And that is so important for us, the community, transgender community. Education is the only hope now for transgender people. Education can transform our lives. For those who cannot pursue an academic life, what we are also trying to do from our foundation, Sahodari Foundation. We work for the social, political, economic empowerment of the transgender community. It's a very small organization, but we have been doing some of the most powerful work to give a dignified life to the community, focusing on education, skill development, and dignified employment. So one of the things we have been doing from last February is that because I am an artist, how I became an artist, I'll tell you. During my school days, when I wanted to express my gender identity, my parents wouldn't accept or would not understand me. My teachers wouldn't understand me. My friends wouldn't. And there was no literature in magazines or newspapers about gender non-conformative persons. 1 or 2 articles about foreign people changing their sex and all that might come. But otherwise, there have been no positive stories at all. Once in a while, transgender people will be on newspaper, but in a very, very derogatory manner. The news media writes it used to write it that way. As a gender confused child, I was inclined to die. I had thought to commit suicide many times because there was no hope. I can't live without my parents. And where will I go when I go out of my homes? I wanted to change my sex. And everyone said, go to Mumbai. And I heard that in Mumbai, most of the transgenders are doing sex work. I don't want to do that. And I wanted to die. And that is when I actually met a transgender person called Asha Kiran from Bangalore. She was well educated. She actually gave me hope that we can live. That one word of hope from one person who's educated, who's seeing life with a light, that changed my whole attitude. And in my free time in school, because I was not able to express my identity, I used to write poetry and I used to draw on paper. Paintbrush and pen were my friends. So I used to draw, I used to write poetry about what I feel inside. That was my outlet. Speaking to the images in a painting or poetry in words was all I can do. And later, after many years, last year I took up painting majorly, and I started painting artworks, and I started keeping it for exhibitions and shows. In fact, last year, in one exhibition, I sold paintings worth 2 lakhs, and I was able to use that money for educating 4 transgender people. So it can transform life. My life. So what was once a challenge for myself, and I was using that skill of painting and drawing, many years later, I developed it. And that skill which helped me to express myself later became a profession, one of my professions. And art is a therapy. Art can be for a cause. I wanted to give that experience to the transgender community. So I chose art. Usually they say art wouldn't sell. But still I took up art, and this year from February, I have been with a mission. 10,000 people in India, I'm going to make them paint, all transgender people. 10,000 people, I'm going to make them paint. And I started this mission in February, giving a workshop first in Coimbatore, and in Kanchipuram, and in Chennai, and in Trivandrum, and in Cochin. So many workshops we have done, and almost right now, 100 transgender people have done paintings. Beautiful work of art. For many of them have never even seen a canvas, not even seen a paintbrush. So when they get into art, it's not only therapy, but it is an honest statement that they put on the canvas. Picasso said, paint like a child. When you grow up, you cannot paint at all. What comes from a child is a beautiful painting. So likewise, our community has begun to do artworks, and recently, just last week, we held a show, our first show, 50 transgender people's artworks, art exhibition. We held it at Art House Jenny's Club, Coimbatore, and Dr. Bal Venkat was there. For many of them from the community, from the transgender community who came, it was a mind-blowing experience for them. Because that experience they would never, it's impossible. And many of them sold artworks too. For the first time, many of them were able to get something out of their talent, which is so inspiring and so motivating for them. Our life, our untold stories on canvas. And it attracts the people, it attracts audience, it attracts the viewer. So there is an opportunity that I created using our own skills, the hidden skills. There's no point in complaining. There is no point in asking the government or waiting for the government to support us, waiting for the politicians to help us. We need to do something. And we are doing it. Each one of us is taking an initiative in our lives to change our lives. Dear doctors, these paintings are there on the 5th floor where everything is exhibited. We have exhibited all these paintings, including some of my work as well. So I request you, when you have time during your tea break, please have a look at our paintings. I'm sure you will love them. Do remember that none of them are professional painters, have never gone to the school, including me. And we believe that we have done some wonderful, really wonderful artworks. Please have a look at them and do support us. What can be done to change the transgender community's life today? As doctors, you have a tremendous role to play. I remember when I wanted to transition into a woman, I didn't know where to go. There were no psychiatrists who would understand gender diversity or gender dysphoric condition. There were no gender clinics to help us. There were not enough qualified doctors who would do gender SRS or sex reassignment surgery. And you know what the transgender people used to do? They used to self-molest. They used to self-molest themselves or do penectomy. Even today, till today, there is no proper help coming for us regarding hormone replacement therapy or sex reassignment surgery, preoperative, postoperative care, which is like in Europe and in America and in Canada, it has gone to an advanced level. But when it comes to this part of our life, the transition has been very difficult. Surgery is very, very expensive. So that is all some of the problems that the community we face. And we also face a lot of psychological problems, because right from our childhood we have been abused, rejected, discriminated. it has been a hard thing for us to actually live a very normal life. We try to give the best because of our gender identity. We face a lot of problems every day. We all face so many problems in the society every day. And we constantly fight. We are in a battle 24 hours, except our sleeping time. So in one way, that teaches us how to live, how to fight. But on the other hand, it is also an important role for the society to change. And as doctors, you have this role of trying to help us medically. Your students need to know about us, about transgender people, about gender diversity. And I hope that would change. Socially, it has to change. Families have to accept it. Society has to accept. Schools have to bring education. Colleges have to bring education on transgender. And definitely medical colleges. So I think it is so essential that we, as another human being like you, we deserve a good life like all of you. The community will change, and that change comes from education, and that change comes from educated people making a change too. So as change makers, I don't see all of you as doctors, I see you all as change makers. When you go home to your place, I'm sure you would look at our people in a very different way. We need families, which may be impossible for us to get back to. But we need at least live a dignified life. And our future generations need to wipe away this life of beggars and sex workers and street dancers, and to have to come up as police officers, doctors, engineers, politicians, models, scientists, etc., etc. And that change comes from each one of us, as doctors, as civil servants, as citizens, as human beings, as man, woman, and transgender. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you.